8 miles, 2,000 feet straight down, 3 hours on a switchback trail carved into a vertical canyon wall. That is the shortest way into a town that sits inside the United States of America. Not a ghost town, not a movie set. A functioning American village with a post office, a school, a clinic, and a population of about 200 people, where the only ways in or out are walking, riding a mule, or paying for a helicopter. And the United States Postal Service, the same federal agency that runs drones in Texas and overnight planes out of Memphis, delivers letters there by tying them to the back of an animal, 5 days a week. In 2026, everything you assume about modern America breaks the moment you step off the rim. There is no road, there is no airstrip, there is no cell signal that reaches the bottom. There is a creek, a waterfall the color of swimming pools, and a town that the United States Department of Agriculture has officially called the most remote community in the contiguous United States, not in Alaska, not on an island, in Arizona. So this is the story of 3 things that should not exist together. A federal post office that runs on hooves, a people who were not lost, but who were pushed below the visible map of America, and a town where every loaf of bread, every can of soup, every refrigerator, and every child's birthday present arrives on the back of a mule that has walked down a cliff for 8 miles to get there. The town is called Supai. It sits inside a tributary of the Grand Canyon in northern Arizona, on the floor of what the maps call Havasu Canyon. The canyon walls above it rise vertically for 2,000 feet. The nearest paved road ends at a parking lot called Hualapai Hilltop, 70 miles from anywhere recognizable, and from that parking lot, the road simply stops. There is no shoulder. There is no continuation. The asphalt ends at a cliff. What begins where the asphalt ends is a foot trail. It descends 2,004 feet in 8 miles of switchbacks cut into rust-red rock. In summer, the canyon walls hold the heat the way an oven holds heat after the dial is turned off, and the trail surface, at midday, can reach temperatures that strip the rubber off the soles of cheap shoes. There is no shade for the first 2 miles. There is no water until you reach the village. If you are not walking, you are riding. The Havasupai tribe operates a string of horses and mules that take visitors down, for a fee, on the same trail the mail uses. Or you pay for a seat on a small helicopter, contracted privately by the tribe, that lands on a dirt clearing inside the village a few days a week, weather permitting. Those are the options. There are no others. And the mules. The mules are not a tourist attraction. They are not a costume piece. They are how the United States Postal Service has been delivering mail to Supai under federal contract since at least 1938, when the first photographs of the route were taken by the National Park Service, and almost certainly for decades before that. The Smithsonian's National Postal Museum has confirmed it is the last official mail-by-mule route in the country, and possibly one of the last in the world. Subscribe to Impossible Lands. Because the strangest part of this story is not the mule. The strangest part is that the mule is required. The United States, the largest economy on Earth, has a town inside its own borders that cannot be reached by car. Not anywhere, not by any route. And the reason is not poverty. The reason is geography that the federal government has decided not to fight. Most people, if they have heard of Supai at all, have heard of it through Instagram. They have seen photographs of Havasu Falls, a 100-foot waterfall that pours into a pool the color of melted turquoise 2 miles past the village. They have heard that you need a permit, that the permits sell out within minutes of being released, that you sometimes wait a year for a chance to camp there. They have heard that the water is cold and that the rocks are white and that the place looks like a postcard. That is the surface. That is what the algorithm shows you. Here is what it leaves out. The waterfall is 2 miles further down the canyon. The town is what you walk through to get to the waterfall. And for most of the tourists who pass through Supai every year, the town is a 5-minute stop on the way to somewhere prettier. People do not look up at the houses. They do not notice the elementary school, the small clinic, the cafe, the convenience store, or the post office. They are walking through someone's hometown to get to a swimming pool. About 20,000 of them do this every year. The permanent population of the village is somewhere between 200 and 500 people, depending on how you count and which census year you trust. The 2020 census recorded the population as 0 because the census takers could not get reliable access. The Associated Press, reporting in 2023, estimated about 500 of the tribe's nearly 770 members live in the village. The number depends on the season, the floods, and how many young adults are out of the canyon for work or school, and the village is here because it was made to be here. The Havasupai, who call themselves the Havasubaja, the people of the blue-green water, have lived in this region for at least 800 years, and probably longer. But the canyon was not their whole world. For most of their history, they moved seasonally. In the spring and summer, they farmed the canyon floor, irrigating crops with creek water that ran year-round. In the fall and winter, they moved up to the plateau above the rim, hunting deer and piñon nuts across an area that, at one time, covered land roughly the size of the state of Delaware. Then came the Silver Rush, the Santa Fe Railroad, the cattle ranchers, and the cartographers. In 1880, President Hayes restricted the Havasupai to 38,000 acres. 2 years later, in 1882, President Arthur reduced that figure to 518 acres. 518, from land the size of a small state to a strip of canyon floor smaller than most American suburbs. It was, at the time, the smallest reservation in the United States. The plateau they used to winter on was declared public land. Cattle ranchers fenced the water holes. Game wardens drove the families back down. A Havasupai man named Billy Burrow, interviewed decades later, described it plainly. The whites would bar the Supais from the water holes, the grazing lands, all of that. Homesteaders and cattle owners put in lines, saying that they are not to roam that country anymore. And here is the part that does not appear in the tourism brochures. The Havasupai did not choose to live at the bottom of a canyon, 8 miles from the nearest road. They were pushed there. The remote village that the United States now markets as one of the most beautiful corners of the country was, originally, the smallest cage the federal government could legally draw around them. In 1928, the last Havasupai farmer still living on the canyon rim, a man known as Captain Burrow, was forcibly removed by the National Park Service. The oasis where he had lived for years was renamed Indian Garden. It stayed that way for almost a century. In May 2023, the National Park Service formally renamed the site Havasupai Gardens after a unanimous vote of the United States Board of Geographic Names. The renaming ceremony was attended by Captain Burrow's descendants. It took 95 years. So the people who were pushed down into the canyon stayed in the canyon. And the canyon, once you live inside it, becomes a problem of logistics. Everything has to come down. Every gallon of gasoline for the generators that keep the lights on, every sack of flour for the cafe, every bottle of medicine for the clinic, every textbook for the kindergarten through 8th grade school, every refrigerator, every washing machine, every wedding dress. And it comes down on the back of a mule. Each animal carries up to 200 pounds, distributed in equal weight on each side of its body so it does not tip on the switchbacks. A typical mail train, according to the United States Postal Service, includes between 10 and 22 mules, led by a single wrangler on horseback. It takes the train about 3 hours to descend the 8 miles into the village. Going back up, with empty packs, it can take 5 hours. The animals walk at the only pace the geometry of the trail allows. In the village of Peach Springs, Arizona, an hour's drive from the trailhead, there is a post office. According to the Smithsonian, it is the only post office in the entire United States with a walk-in freezer. The freezer exists because perishable mail destined for Supai, ice cream, frozen meat, vaccines, has to be stored while it waits for the mules. A contractor picks it up, drives it for an hour to the rim, transfers it to the pack train, and the train walks it down. The journey time, from drop-off in Peach Springs to arrival in Supai, can take more than a week. Inside the village, there are no cars. There are no roads, in the sense the rest of America understands roads. There are dirt paths between houses, wide enough for a horse. Residents move around on foot, on horseback, or on ATVs, which are the only motorized vehicles small enough to use the paths. Dogs sleep in the middle of intersections, children walk to school past corrals. And every detail of daily life is shaped by the question of weight. If it cannot be carried on a mule, it cannot exist here. If it cannot fit in a helicopter sling, it has to be broken down into pieces, packed in and reassembled. The houses, the school, the clinic, the post office itself, every wall, every roof, every pane of glass, came down the trail one mule load at a time, and the canyon does not always cooperate. Havasu Creek, the same creek that gives the falls their color and the village its name, drains a plateau of roughly 3,000 square miles above the canyon. When monsoon storms hit that plateau, between June and August, the water has nowhere to go except down, and the only place down, eventually, is Supai. On August 17, 2008, an earthen dam upstream of the village failed during a night of heavy rain. The creek surged. Hundreds of residents and tourists were lifted out of the canyon by helicopter over the following 2 days. The trails, the bridges, and the campground were damaged badly enough that the canyon stayed closed to visitors until the following spring. More flooding in 2010 kept it closed again until May of 2011. In July 2018, another flash flood sent a 7-foot wall of water down Havasupai Creek in roughly 15 minutes. The United States Geological Survey, gauge upstream of the village, recorded the creek rising from 1 foot to 8 feet between 12:45 and 1 in the afternoon. 172 visitors were evacuated to the village community center and the elementary school, the only buildings on high enough ground to be safe. In August 2024, another flood closed the canyon to tourists for more than a month. And this is the part of the story the tourism websites do not foreground. The same geography that protects the Havasupai from the noise of the modern world also traps them in the path of its weather. The isolation that looks like freedom from the rim is, from the floor of the canyon, a corridor with no exit. When the water rises, there is one way out: the helicopter. There is a school in Supai, Havasupai Elementary, run by the Bureau of Indian Education, kindergarten through 8th grade. After 8th grade, a Havasupai child has to leave the canyon to continue their education. The traditional destination for decades was Sherman Indian High School in Riverside, California, more than 400 miles away. Some children stay with host families closer to Phoenix. Either way, at 13 or 14 years old, they ride a mule, or walk, or fly out of the only home they have ever known, and they do not come back to it as residents for years, sometimes ever. The Havasupai language, spoken by every member of the tribe, is the only Native American language in the United States that all members of the tribe still speak. Linguists consider this almost statistically impossible. Most indigenous languages in North America have lost their last fluent speakers or are within a generation of doing so. The Havasupai language survived because the 8-mile trail kept the outside world from saturating the village fast enough to break it. And then there is the music. In 1982, the music producer Chris Blackwell, founder of Island Records, learned that the residents of Supai had developed a deep love of reggae. According to multiple accounts, including reporting by the magazine Afropop, he chartered a helicopter, loaded a grand piano into it, flew the piano down into the canyon, and arranged a concert featuring members of Bob Marley's band. Bob Marley himself had reportedly wanted to visit Supai before his death the previous year. The grand piano, lowered into a slot canyon in northern Arizona by helicopter so 150 Havasupai could hear live reggae, is one of the most American sentences ever written, and almost nobody outside the village has ever heard it. So this is what Supai actually is. Not a postcard, not an attraction, a town of around 200 to 500 people who were pushed below the floor of a continent by their own government, who held onto a language their neighbors lost, who run a federal post office on the back of an animal, and who watch monsoon water rise behind their elementary school every summer because there is nowhere else to put the school. It is the part of the United States that the United States almost forgot was inside it. And the only reason it still exists, the only reason the federal mail still arrives 5 days a week, the only reason the school still opens in the morning, is that a string of mules walks down a cliff every day in heat that warps boot soles, carrying letters, medicine, and groceries for people whose ancestors have been in that canyon for at least 800 years. The mule is not a relic, the mule is the road. So here is the question. If the most powerful country on earth has a town inside it that can only be supplied by a 4-legged animal walking down a cliff, what exactly does the word remote mean? And how many other places like this are we choosing not to see? Subscribe, hit the bell, and I'll see you on Impossible Lands.